Thank you. All right, thank you, Peter. Can everybody hear me? Can you hear me way in the back there? If at any point you have trouble hearing me, please let me know. I do have this little headset that I can hook up and will help project my voice a little bit. But if I don't, if I could just do it like this, it's probably more comfortable. But just let me know, okay? And I'll be happy to turn it on. So welcome. My name is Robert Oakes, and I am a singer-songwriter, a teacher, and an author of this book right here, Ghosts of the Berkshires. And thank you. Thanks. Thank you so much. And writing this book grew out of my experience for the last 12 years now as the ghost tour guide at the Mount in Lenox. Has anyone been to the Mount before? All right. Yeah, I know some of you have been on the ghost tour. Hi. And the Mount is, if you're not familiar with it, it's one of the many Gilded Age estates that were built in the Berkshires between roughly the end of the Civil War and the beginning of the First World War by some of the most famously wealthy people in America. And they are all over the place here in Berkshire County. Now, the Mount's famous resident and designer was Edith Wharton, who's a Pulitzer Prize-winning author and wrote many books. She's best known for books like The House of Mirth and The Age of Innocence and Ethan Frome. Those are sort of her best-known works, two of which she wrote right there in Lenox. But one thing that a lot of people don't know about Edith Wharton is that she also wrote ghost stories, even though she had this debilitating fear and phobia, not only about ghost stories, but about ghosts themselves, the ghosts that lurk in those stories. And what's so interesting about Wharton is that she had this fear and decided that rather than succumb to it, she would face her fear by writing ghost stories, by writing her own stories. I think it was her way of kind of taking control of this thing that she was so afraid of. And so, and the thing that I find so interesting now is that this house that was the home of this woman who was deathly afraid of ghosts and who wrote ghost stories, has become a place that has inspired so many stories because of the things that people have experienced there over the years. And, as part of my tour, I take people through and I share with them some of the many stories that we have to tell. And they are first-hand accounts. Well, I should say they're second-hand accounts because I'm telling them. Although sometimes things do happen on our ghost tours that make them first-hand accounts because, they become very active even while we're doing our tour. But there's a ghost in here somewhere. I get a feeling that we're not alone. But what I find so interesting about the tour and about the experiences is how varied they are, how many different kinds of experiences people report over the years. One of the things I like to do before I begin the tour is I like to ask people, do you believe in ghosts? Okay? So I thought this would be a good question to ask right here, is to find out how many of us here believe in the reality of ghosts. Not just in the stories, but that ghosts really do exist. All right, quite a few of us. Most of us, I would say. And how many of us would you say that you do not believe in ghosts? You are certain they don't exist. Okay. And how many of you would you describe yourself as a skeptic? Maybe there are ghosts. All right, but where's the proof? We like to have evidence to support our beliefs, right? Especially in the scientific age that we live in today. Wharton actually had some really interesting thoughts about this question of belief. And part of it had to do with the idea that actually belief, when it comes to ghosts, is pointless and unnecessary. Because belief is something that's happening up here in your head, but when you experience a ghost, it's something down here. It's like a physical, visceral thing, and the mind could be totally not buying it, but nevertheless, you're experiencing the fear of it, and you're having an experience, something that you can actually intuit, maybe, and feel, even if you don't necessarily believe that it's actually happening. And, for myself, I think that there are times that I've experienced things that I say, that's pretty easy to debunk that, actually. Or maybe photographs have been sent to us, that kind of thing. And I say, I don't know about that one. There are other times, though, that I've had experiences that I really do find difficult to explain in any other way but a genuine paranormal experience. And so I consider myself to be someone who is certainly open to the possibility, and that I have had experiences that are as I said, difficult to explain. But mostly what I love about it is the mystery of it. I love that there's this sense of wonder, that, that something is around us that we can't quite see, but we can sense perhaps. And even if we don't, we hear these stories. And the stories that have been told about these experiences are wonderful. I love the stories. Sometimes I think the stories are highly imaginative. That sometimes people will come to a place and they'll say, there's something here, I feel it. And then they'll make up a story about it. And sometimes the story may not be the thing, but nevertheless the story is wonderful. And it points to something mysterious, something behind that experience, right? Sometimes the stories are the first-hand accounts, like this is what happened to me. I saw this, I felt this, I sensed this, and those are wonderful as well. And I love to take people through places that are said to be haunted and invite them to engage with the place with their imagination and their senses fully engaged, right? And why imagination, right? Why might that be an important quality or faculty to use when it comes to ghosts? Because you think, like, typically we think of imagination as it doesn't exist, right? If you imagine something, it is definitely not real. But there's possible to think about imagination in a different way. That what it's doing when we imagine is it's sort of getting us away from, a little bit outside of our rational thinking mind and our sense perceptions, and allowing us to perhaps step into another level of reality in which ghosts may be existing around us, and we just simply don't sense them in our normal way. And actually, Edith Wharton had similar ideas about the imagination and its role in our connection to spirits. In one of her ghost books, I have this one here actually, in the preface to the book, she wrote that what is most needed in order to appreciate a ghost or a ghost story is what she called the ghost instinct, right? Which is something that we can feel on a primal level, even though our rational intellect tells us that it isn't actually happening. And this is what, as I said, causes us to feel that fear, even though we know it's not really happening or it's just a story, right, that we're reading. And she actually felt that we in the modern world, and now this was over 100 years ago she was writing, were in danger of losing this ghost instinct because of all of the many demands on our attention, all of the things that keep us from focusing in an imaginative way on the presence of a place. What she wrote was, I have made the depressing discovery that this faculty has become almost atrophied in modern man. Now, think about this. Over 100 years ago, in her time, what she was talking about as the things that were robbing us of our connection to this presence, the worst things that she had to contend with were what she called the wireless, which is not Wi-Fi, but the radio, right? The wireless radio, and cinema, okay, films. I can only imagine how she would bemoan the situation today when we have so many devices and so much media that is constantly vying for our attention, and it is hard to give the attention to that subtle presence that we can feel on a very fine level, even if we can't necessarily see it with our eyes. She said that the imaginary or the ghost instinct can prime us to feel the presence of the ghost that we may not be endowed with the gift of seeing. And she called this the ghost feeler, the person who can feel it even if they can't necessarily see it. And this is why I love ghost stories. I love these stories because they connect us to that sense of mystery and that sense of wonder, that sense of reaching towards some presence that we can feel in certain places and at certain hours. And maybe by compelling us to use our imagination, they can help us to make contact with the spirit world, right? So while working on the book, I found many places here in the Berkshires where people have sensed this kind of unseen presence, and they have reported it as a number of different experiences, whether it was an apparition that they saw, or a disembodied voice, or a hand brushing up against them in the dark, or the sounds that they can't quite explain. And it was something strange, something that they couldn't explain, but that they would tell in a story. And this became the lore that began to surround all of these places. And as I went to decide on which places would be featured in the book, I looked for places that had the most lore around it, the most stories that people tell. Because to me, that's a sign that there is something about that place, whether it is the actual experiences that people are having, or it's something that's engaging their imagination and making them invent a story. Either way, there's something there. And so I wanted to include that. And often what I would do, I tried to do it every single time, although some places were closed, is to go to the place and to see if I can feel it myself and let that be sort of part of how I write the piece, is to try to let the place affect me in that way. Some places, unfortunately, I couldn't go to, like Houghton Mansion is no longer open to the public for things like this. And so I had to just stand outside very sadly and take a picture of the front, But there's so much written about Houghton Mansion. There was so much available to me and people who have been there that I was able to piece it together that way. So tonight, here in this historic lodge at the top of the tallest mountain in Massachusetts, I will share with you some of the stories with a special focus on locations that are right up here near us in the north part of the county. And I will invite you, as you listen, to let yourself be transported by your own instinct of imagination and see, if something affects you as you listen. And even if it doesn't, even if you don't believe in ghosts, I still think the experience is worthwhile, because whenever we connect with a place and we let our imagination and our instinct and our intuition lead the way, the world around us becomes much richer and more meaningful. All right, so I highly encourage that. So I'm going to do some readings from the book, and I'm going to start with the Fort Massachusetts. Is anyone familiar with Fort Massachusetts? How many of us here, by the way, live right nearby? Most of us. All right. Within a few miles or so of this area, of the mountain? Yeah, nice. So great to see everybody here from this area, and I hope to represent it in a way that you will be happy with. So let me know. And certainly at the end, if you have stories that I haven't heard, and some of the stories I'll share are ones you probably know very well known, like the Hoosic Tunnel. And others are actually ones, there was one in particular, a man whose family is from out this way, just emailed me an experience he had in one of the local cemeteries that I'll read tonight. So that may be one that you haven't heard before, unless you happen to know him. So the first one is Fort Massachusetts. Now, Fort Massachusetts was something, I had actually found a story about it in this book called The Ghosts of Old Berkshire by Willard Douglas Coxey, who's a writer. He was from Philadelphia area originally, but he lived in Egremont, and he died in the 1930s. And before he died, he wrote a couple of books about the Berkshires, including this one on old ghost stories. And it turned out to be a really valuable resource for me as I was looking for the stories of the Berkshires. And he wrote a story about this Fort Massachusetts. So let me share with you from the book just about what I found. I found this place actually difficult to find. Like, where was Fort Massachusetts, right? And I found it in the parking lot of a Price Chopper.
Back right corner.
You know it, right?
Is it chimney standing?
Yes, that's it. It took me a little while. I was like looking on maps. I was like trying to do, some of it is like sleuth work. You're like trying to figure out like things that people mention about it, where it might be. So eventually I did find it. So this is the Spirit Soldier of Fort Massachusetts. Can everybody hear me okay? Is it in the back? Okay, good. On a small patch of grass in the parking lot of a now empty Price Chopper supermarket in North Adams, these words are written in stone. With gratitude to the defenders of the fort and to perpetuate the memory of the scene of their struggle in the wilderness. Long gone is the fort to which these words refer, the 18th century English frontier garrison called Fort Massachusetts. The only indication that it ever stood there is a single stone chimney, the remains of a 1930s replica of the original structure. Built in 1745, Fort Massachusetts was one of several English outposts constructed along the northern boundary of the colony to help protect frontier settlements against incursions by the French and their native allies and the Dutch settlers from New York. In 1746, during King George's War, I will not get this name right, French Major Pierre de Rigaud de Vandreuil, thank you, and his force of nearly 1,000 men captured and burned the meagerly manned fortress, and they marched their prisoners off to Canada. But in 1747, the fort was rebuilt. When inevitably the enemy returned, the better defended second fort successfully repelled the attack. There is reason to believe that the soldiers who struggled to defend the second Fort Massachusetts may have been helped by something other than sturdier walls and more reinforcements from nearby Fort Deerfield. According to a story told by Willard Douglas Coxey in his 1934 book, Ghosts of Old Berkshire, the second Fort Massachusetts was saved from capture and destruction by the spirit of Corporal Dim, a soldier who had fallen during the attack on the first fort. As the enemy soldiers closed in on the outpost and capture again seemed imminent, the ghost of Corporal Dim rose from his nearby grave and appeared on the ramparts, where bullets and arrows passed through his eerily illuminated body. Coxey wrote, "This was no ordinary sentinel. He was too uncanny, too strangely transparent to be of earth." The enemy was so horrified by the sight of this spirit soldier that they abandoned the attack and fled into the woods. Is there any historical truth behind this ghost story? While Coxey's account appears to be the only mention of a Corporal Dim at Fort Massachusetts, either living or dead, who can say what spirit may have inspired those brave defenders to struggle against fear and overwhelming odds in the wilderness frontier of the early Berkshires? As I said, if you can find it, go find the spot. It's a beautiful little memorial that's been put there. And to my mind, it's even more poignant considering that it's sort of there in the midst of this parking lot, and Price Chopper and everything. This one little remnant of very old history. Well, the next piece I want to share with you is the Hooton Mansion. Are you all familiar with Hooton Mansion? No. Some of you are. Okay. And has anyone here had the opportunity to visit Hooton Mansion when it was open? Nice. Did investigations there or? A wedding there. Nice. And yeah, investigations? Yeah. And I am sad that I sort of missed that opportunity. By the time I was come around to write the book, it wasn't open. But there are so many people who have investigated. There's so much that's been written about it that it really helped me quite a lot. So this is the story of Hooton Mansion. Gut-wrenching grief, guilt, and the long-lingering shadow of tragedy have inspired many reports of unseen entities at the Hooton Mansion in North Adams. The mansion was once home to Albert Charles Hooton, the first mayor and leading citizen of this former mill town in northern Berkshire County. The son of a Vermont farmer, Hooton rose to prominence in the late 1800s as one of the most successful New England businessmen of his time. He was best known for running and revitalizing the Arnold Print Works, which was located at the current site of the Massachusetts Museum of Contemporary Art. On nearby Church Street in 1897, Hooton built his 17th-room neoclassical revival home with mahogany-paneled walls and ceilings, Italian marble, onyx and rough stone fireplaces, white and gold-plated hardware, plate glass windows, and a glass-enclosed sun porch looking out onto lawns and gardens. Intended to be a place where Hooton could enjoy happy times with his beloved family as he retired from public life, this majestic home came to bear witness to family catastrophe. At 9 a.m. on August 1st, 1914, Hooton, his youngest daughter Mary, and family friend Sybil Hutton, along with her husband Dr. Robert Hutton, set out from the mansion in Hooton's 1914 Pierce Arrow touring car for a pleasure drive to Bennington, Vermont. At the wheel was John Witters, Hooton's chauffeur and coachman of 42 years. Just outside the town of Pownell, Vermont, at about 10:45 a.m., the car climbed the steep and narrow Pownell Center Hill, which Hooton and his wife Cordelia had always dreaded, believing it to be one of the most dangerous stretches of highway in the country. As they neared the brow of the hill, Witters swerved to avoid a team of workmen and inexplicably lost control of the vehicle. It plunged through a thin wire fence and down an embankment, overturning several times before landing in a nearby pasture. Everyone except Mary was thrown from the car, which rolled directly over Sybil, crushing her head and killing her within minutes. Mary, with her face crushed and spine fractured, was brought to the North Adams Hospital, where she soon succumbed to multiple internal injuries. The men, though they sustained only minor bruises, cuts, and broken bones, were deeply traumatized. After the loss of his beloved wife, Dr. Houghton was left speechless and shattered. Witters, who felt himself partly to blame, was absolutely inconsolable. He was reported to have uttered the words, "I wish it could have been me," all through the night following the accident. And though he was placed on suicide watch, it ultimately proved futile. At 4 a.m. on August 2nd, Witters entered the basement of the Hooton barn, put a revolver to his right temple, and fired a single shot. His death, it was presumed, was instantaneous. For Hooton, the shock of the ordeal, along with the death of his daughter and the suicide of his loyal employee, contributed to his swift decline and death 10 days later in the master bedroom. The funerals for father and daughter were held at the Church Street home, and both, along with Witters, were laid to rest in the family plot at nearby Southview Cemetery. Sorrow and sympathy spread through the local community as the entire city suffered this appalling tragedy along with its most prominent family. Businesses closed early and black bunting was draped on the printworks and the Main Street facades. Mrs. Hooton lived out her remaining years on the same property where she had said goodbye to her husband and daughter and where the grief-stricken Witters had taken his life. When she died in 1918, Cordelia was buried beside her husband and daughter in Southview Cemetery. Several years later, the surviving Hooton children sold the mansion to an association of 5 Masonic orders, which built a huge 2-story addition with lodge room and banquet hall, celebrating its completion in 1929 with a ritualistic dedication ceremony. For more than 80 years, the Masons continued to own and occupy the building until they sold it to a private investment group in 2017. It was the Masons who first began to experience paranormal activity at the mansion on a day-to-day basis, according to the Lafayette Greylock Masonic Lodge Facebook page. The group experienced so many strange phenomena that in 2004, it decided to start hosting investigations. Not long after, Mason Nick Mantello and his son Josh formed the Berkshire Paranormal Group to run ghost hunts and other events at the house. In the time since the group's formation, the mansion's reputation as a haunted location has spread far and wide, attracting the attention of many ghost seekers, including the Travel Channel's Ghost Hunter Adventurers and the Sci-Fi Channel's Ghost Hunters. There have been numerous articles, books, and websites dedicated to the ghostly history of the estate. Indeed, some consider it to be one of the most haunted houses in New England. It is important to mention, though, that the house is now under new ownership and is no longer open for paranormal events and investigations. That's my little disclaimer. The reports of hauntings at the Houghton Mansion are many and varied. They include reports of cold spots and voices, shadow figures, footsteps, and slamming doors experienced through the main house and temple addition. But the majority of reports seem to center on the basement and the third-floor servants' quarters. Berkshire Paranormal members have seen shadow figures and strange light anomalies, which they call sparklies, in the basement, where they have also reported hearing laughter, which is believed to be that of a little girl who lived in the home that once stood in the same spot. Some have reported seeing this figure peeking out from behind a door, a phenomenon that appears to have been captured in an eerie video recently posted online by members of the Connecticut Paranormal Encounters and Research Group. Taps on the leg, tugs on the hair have also been attributed to this entity, which some call a playful spirit, but others imagine something darker. High above the basement, the third-floor servants' quarters also seem to be a hotspot of paranormal activity. There, Berkshire Paranormal investigators reportedly witnessed a shadow figure appear in a doorway in the middle of the night and move across the room. Nearby neighbors have reported seeing lights on in the section of the house, though electricity no longer runs to these rooms. And a photograph taken by Josh Mantello seems to show the image of a figure peering out from one of the windows. Because John Witters once lived on that floor, many people believe that it's his spirit that lingers there. Some even claim to have seen him or have heard his heavy footsteps on the back staircase that leads up to the room. Kindergarten teacher Lee Mullins, who ran an after-school program at the house, said she heard the footsteps one evening while waiting for a parent to pick up one of her students. When they heard the clear and distinct sound, Mullins and the child ran to the door, expecting to greet her mother. Yet when they opened the door, no one was there. People have been known to feel intense sadness in Witter's chambers, and some have even been brought to tears. Another claimed to have recorded the voice of a man speaking about his heavy heart and felt sure it was Witter's, who because of the accident had every reason to grieve. In Mary's room, which was one floor down, visitors also described feeling a deep sadness. Screams and sobs have been captured there, as well as voices speaking the words, "Get out." There have been footsteps detected and mist shapes and apparitions seen in that room, where a number of objects that once belonged to Mary were said to remain. When sitting in one particular chair, visitors often claim to be touched by an unseen hand. These and so many other strange occurrences at Houghton Mansion are attributed to the ghosts of A.C. Houghton, John, and Mary, 3 victims of that harrowing accident so many years ago. Many believe the tragedy they suffered has left a lasting impression on the house, where Withers remains a prisoner of his everlasting guilt and shame, and where Houghton and his beloved daughter Mary continue to mourn each other's loss and the loss of the happy life they once knew. Unfortunately, a number of these stories from up this way have this kind of tragic quality to them for whatever reason. And many of them, throughout the county that is true, but I found that the ones up here in North County, Hooton Mansion, Hoosic Tunnel, have a real heaviness to them. And so I'm sorry for that. But I will try to lighten things a little with a couple of our stories. Now, one of the things that is so much, it's sort of like a real journey with writing a book like this, is that there were times when I thought I was on the trail of a one story and realized that I was being led to something else, to a different story. And that's the case for this next one that I'm going to read. Has anyone heard of the Mallory homestead? One person. Nice. What do you know about the Mallory? Do you know where it is? Yeah. Yes. And, I had never heard of it before. I didn't know it existed. And I was actually looking for a story about the ghost of Lenox Library. I'd heard people mention that there was a ghost there. So I was poking around online trying to find stories about it. And I scrolled down and looked at this comments, and somebody's mentioning this house in New Ashford. And I'm like, what is that? So I started looking into it, and I found an old newspaper article from the 30s, I believe it was, that told the story. So this is the story of the Mallory homestead. It's getting dark in here. I guess that's appropriate, right? We do. Of course, we do our ghost tour in the total darkness, right? People say, why do you have to be in the dark? Works better that way. Is this in your eyes? You okay? Yeah. All right, let's see if I can. Which one is in your eye? How's that one? All right. Is that all right? Okay. If you drive along Mallory Road in New Ashford, you will find the bones of the town's first home at the edge of a private residence. In the center of a cellar hole, surrounded by a carefully manicured lawn, stands a substantial stone chimney, the only remains of the Mallory homestead, which was built in 1794 by town father Uriah Mallory. On cue. The wooden structure that was once supported by those stones succumbed to a fire on December 16, 1930. But it was an event that occurred there 70 years prior that laid it low in the eyes of locals and made many afraid to go near it at night. On the evening of July 29, 1861, 2 blood-soaked bodies were found lying on the floor of the upstairs bedroom, both with gashes across their throats. The woman, Eunice Vanderwalker Pratt, who was 17, was dead. Her husband, Henry, who was 21, lay gasping. They had only been married for 3 weeks. They had run away from their homes in Osceola, New York, to try to start a new life together in the Berkshires. But when Eunice's father, Mr. Vanderwalker, came after her and found the young lovers living on the Mallory estate, then owned by Uriah's grandson Van Ness, he confronted the couple. He tried to convince young Eunice to come back home with him, but she refused, saying Henry, who was in fact her uncle, was kind to her. According to an article in the December 28, 1930 edition of the Springfield Sunday Union, Pratt and Vanderwalker exchanged angry words, and the young man shook his fist in the air. Eunice was heard saying that she would rather die than return home. Then Pratt put his arm around his bride and whispered in her ear, and the two ascended to the second floor. Minutes later, Vanderwalker, Mrs. Mallory, and others made the gruesome discovery: a murder-suicide attempt that succeeded in killing only Eunice. Pratt survived to face trial, though he was condemned to die by hanging. His sentence was commuted to life in prison. When asked why he did it, Pratt replied, "She wished us to die together." In the years that followed, the Mallory house developed an eerie reputation. Subsequent occupants claimed to see lights, ghosts, and skeletons inside, and indelible bloodstains were said to appear on the second floor. Phoebe Jordan, who lived on a neighboring farm, was quoted in the Union article as saying that she remembered seeing blood in the home which could never be washed off. Others claimed to see faces peering out of the upstairs windows, and they heard the sound of howling voices believed to be those of Eunice and Henry emanating from the chimney. Local children kept their distance, especially at night, as they were afraid to encounter the phantoms in the fireplace. Today the stones are quiet, and the site is peaceful and picturesque. Perhaps the fire of 1930 purged the place of its mournful ghosts and the bloodstains of the desperate lovers that could never again come clean. You can go there. I mean, it's a private residence, but the cellar hole is right near the edge of the road, and you can sort of see the old chimney. I found this picture in the Berkshire Eagle. I know it's hard to see, but it's taken. This was taken in the 1955, where you could still see a lot more of the chimney before the rest of it kind of collapsed over time. But it was apparently known as a haunted place then as well, and that's why it made it into the Eagle. Well, this brings us to the Hoosac Tunnel. You've heard of the Hoosic Tunnel? Yeah. Anyone have any direct experience with the Hoosac Tunnel? Yeah. Anyone have a story to share or some experience? Yes. Near? Are you? Two uncles who worked on it. Yeah. I think I found this piece difficult to write because of how much tragedy, just how much people suffered working on the tunnel, right? How much death there was, and the stories. But if you go to the Hoosac Tunnel today, it's a powerful place. You know, I've been there a couple times, and I went there when I was working on the piece and just kind of soaked it in a little bit, and it stayed with me. I felt like I found it difficult to kind of shake off the energy of the place. It's got a heavy feeling for me. I've occasionally met people who've told me they've walked through the tunnel, which is, I don't recommend that. It is actually illegal, but it's also dangerous. Somebody is ratting out somebody else. But people do it, like walk through the tunnel. Maybe some of you here have done it. And and it's, what do you want to share what that was like?
Dark and cold.
Dark and cold. Yeah, even just walking like right up to the edge of it, that was enough for me.
Is it an active tunnel?
It is. It's an active rail line. So, and there was a news report a couple of reports I saw where pieces of it had actually collapsed near the North Adams entrance, I think it was. Anyway, so, keep that in mind if you plan to go visit. But here it is, the piece on the Hoosac Tunnel. I'm doing on time. In the northernmost part of the county, near the city of North Adams, there is an opening in the side of the mountain through which several freight trains pass every day. Once inside, these trains must travel nearly 5 miles in total darkness beneath countless tons of heavy rock before emerging again into the light. Most conductors must think little of it. It's just another stretch of track to pass before their job is done. But some may find it hard to forget the stories, the tales of gruesome deaths, disembodied voices, and eerie apparitions that have been told for many years about the Hoosac Tunnel. These stories continue to capture the imagination and attract ghost seekers down those tracks through the opening like heroes on a journey to the underworld. Standing on that threshold, peering in, you see only the absence of light, a total void. When walking through, it is as if you are passing out of the world of the living and into the city of the dead. The cold, tomb-like atmosphere surrounds you. The neatly cut blocks overhead give way to pocked stone that looks as if something very old and very big has been clawing away at it for many years, slowly gnawing its way out of the deep. It seems unnatural to go into the ground like this. Everything inside you begs to return to the light. But if you were one of the miners who built the Hoosac Tunnel more than a century ago, you would have had to fight against this natural instinct every day. You would have had to delve deeper and deeper down into the dark, feeling as though you were being buried alive, as indeed many were. The Hoosic Tunnel project was started in 1851 as a bold attempt to conquer an overwhelming natural obstacle, the Hoosac Range in northern Berkshires, a spur of the Appalachians, some of the oldest mountains on earth. These impenetrable heights effectively cut New Englanders off from the rest of the nation. Their solution to this isolation was to bore a nearly 5-mile-long hole through Hoosac Mountain, from the town of Florida to the city of North Adams, allowing the railway line direct access to New York State and the western frontier beyond. By that time it was completed in 1875, the Hoosac Tunnel was hailed as an engineering marvel, one of the greatest achievements of the 19th century. But because so many men died during its construction, it also came to be known as the Bloody Pit and the Tunnel from Hell, a cursed and haunted place that was feared by many. The wretched nature and sheer danger of the work required to build the tunnel certainly did not help the project's reputation. To pierce a hole through the mountain meant the excavation of 2 million tons of rock, a grim and daunting task, especially given the technology that was available at the time. The workmen's first solution was to use a state-of-the-art tunnel boring machine, which failed after the first 10 feet. Undaunted, the workmen persisted, gnawing inch by inch into ancient stone with a pneumatic drill, gunpowder, pickaxes, and shovels. In 1865, progress was accelerated by the introduction of nitroglycerin, but because it was an extremely unstable explosive, it brought new dangers and led to the first widely reported disaster at the site. On March 20th, 1863, explosive experts Ringo Kelly, Ned Brinkman, and Billy Nash set a charge and ran for cover, though only Kelly made it back to the bunker alive. It seems he ignited the charge prematurely, burying the others beneath a ton of fallen rock. Kelly was not seen again until 1 year later, when he was found strangled to death at the very spot where the explosion had occurred. No one was ever charged with the crime, though many workers believed it was the angry ghosts of Brinkman and Nash who had taken revenge on Kelly that night. Shortly after this incident occurred, many men began reporting hearing the sound of disembodied voices and cries of agony coming from deep inside the rock. Many refused to enter the tunnel after sunset, and still others walked off the project completely, slowing the pace of progress to a crawl. Though officials insisted the sound was that of howling wind through the tunnel, the men were not satisfied, so investigators were brought in to search the tunnel in an attempt to calm the workmen's fears. This plan backfired, though, as the investigators themselves reported hearing the unsettling sound of groans in the deep, cold dark, which they believed were not caused by wind. Possibly the most horrifying incident to occur at the site took place on October 17, 1867, when a crew of workmen descended into the central shaft. This massive hole, which was dug at the midpoint of the tunnel, allowed the workers to burrow out from the center and join with the crews digging in from the east and west sides of the mountain. The shaft included an elevator with a hoist at the top. It was used to haul the heavy rock up from the hole. There were also pumps that kept it free of water, and one 1,000-foot vertical exhaust shaft that allowed for the ventilation of poisonous gases. That day, while the crew was excavating the exhaust shaft, a candle in the hoist housing ignited naphtha fumes, setting off an explosion. The hoist collapsed into the shaft, raining fiery debris and freshly sharpened drill bits down into the heads of the workmen below. And because the pumps were also destroyed, the shaft began to fill with water and noxious fumes. A man who was sent down in an attempt to rescue had to be pulled up quickly from the poisonous cloud. Once he was out, he reportedly gasped, "No hope," before slipping into unconsciousness. Officials concluded that the men below were beyond rescue and no further attempts were made. Months later, workers did reach the bottom, only to discover that several of the men had survived the explosion and falling debris, living long enough to build a raft with which they attempted to float themselves to the surface before dying of suffocation. For nearly a year afterward, many workers and local residents claimed they saw apparitions of the lost miners moving through the mist and trees toward the shaft, with tools slung over their shoulders. It was said that the apparitions would vanish suddenly, leaving no trace in the snow on the mountaintop. Others said they could hear the faint sound of cries emanating from the earth below their feet. These eerie reports persisted until the last of the 13 bodies was recovered and laid to rest. In spite of the many disasters and delays, the tunnel project was at last completed, though at a higher cost in both time and money than anyone had anticipated. But it was the human cost that cut the deepest. In all, nearly 200 of the project's roughly 800 workmen died, mostly in explosions and collapses. Tales of their ordeals and gruesome deaths and reports of lingering spirits in the dark have continued to haunt the surrounding hills ever since, attracting ghost seekers who report bizarre experiences of their own. One local hunter claimed to hear strange voices that lured him into the opening, where he said he was accosted by entities that left him battered and beaten. Others claimed to have seen odd lights, orbs, and phantom figures, and they claimed to have heard the sounds of muffled voices and heavy wet footsteps along the rails. Some especially bold adventurers have even dared to walk the entire 5 miles of the tunnel from end to end. Several claim to feel as if something unseen walked behind or beside them. But it is certainly not advisable to walk the length of the tunnel. Several trains still pass through every day, and the light you see coming towards you on the tracks may not be a ghostly miner after all. So did anyone who walked the tunnel, did you see a light in there? Anyone see anything like that? Yes?
So, no, I didn't walk the entire time. As a teenager growing up in North Dallas, the river was went in maybe 150 feet.
Yeah.
And the howling and the noise was just
Inside.
enough to, yeah.
And you could see how, like, it wouldn't take much, right? You hear that sound and, right. Yeah, yeah. Well, I have this other story I want to share with you that was emailed to me by someone recently whose family comes from North Adams. He lives out in Eastern Mass now. His name is Paul, and he shared this story with me, and I just think it's pretty remarkable. And I had actually been to this cemetery recently when he had sent this to me, and I said, wow, I didn't know. So here's the story that this is Paul's writing. 10 years ago, I was at Hillside Cemetery in North Adams with my wife, Judy. We had driven out from the Boston area, where we still live to this day. But she, with other family members, wanted to meet me there and find the grave of a family person who died in the Hoosic Tunnel boiler explosion. So they made their way to the area where they thought that he was laid to rest. Now, I was with another family member who did not want to roam those hills because he had bad knees, and so did I. So we stood alone. Now, we were in the side of the cemetery where it sloped up to the tree line, not the other side of the street where there's a huge marker that looks like a tree. Now, we were standing in this left of the cemetery by the road. There was a headstone where we stood that had a cross on top of it. While we stood there and watched them plod along up in front of us at the tree line, a body appeared, too far away to identify, but it was a full body, and it was making its way toward us down the small pathway. As it got closer, we could see that it was a woman dressed in all white, but in a dress not of our period. And as she drew closer, we could see that she was young, very pale, with shoulder-length straight hair and dark eyes. She walked up to us and said in a sweet yet quiet voice, "Have you seen my dog?" The other gent that I was with said no. She said, "Thank you." Then she turned and walked back up the hill. At this point, I should note that she had a dress on that was not appropriate for the weather, too light, and she had no shoes on. You see, this was the end of October. It was 40 degrees out and raining. She walked back up towards the tree line just before she got where she was and disappeared. Gone. We couldn't speak. A short time later, our party came back to us. My wife said, "It looked like you two were talking to someone. We didn't see anyone." We told them the story. Another member of the party who lived in the area said that Hillside has a reputation for strange things, and that was it. take it for what it's worth, but to this day, I remember it like it was yesterday. That's from Paul. Anyone else have an experience near or in that cemetery? Did you?
So yeah, I grew up in North Adams.
Yeah.
Hillside Cemetery. And I was babysitting my youngest daughter's Siberian Husky, Aurora. And we were visiting my parents in North Adams. And she got loose. And she ran through Brown Street, up through Hillside Cemetery.
Yeah. Do you want to share like louder so everyone can hear you?
I came across a woman and I said, "Have you seen our dog?" Yeah.
Really?
Honest to God, strictly did.
Do you think it was the
I
same?
have no idea. I came across a woman and I said, "Have you seen our dog?"
Wow.
And she was a Siberian Husky. Her name was Aurora.
Yeah.
Yeah. I have no idea.
Wow. That's pretty remarkable.
It is what it is.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for sharing that. Well, we're getting close to the end of the presentation, and I wanted to open it up just for a little bit to see whether there are any questions, anything you want to share, any experiences. Anyone? Yeah.
I grew up in Berkshire in Adams, and then one of the rooms, all my brothers and sisters ended up staying in that room, and you could feel something sit down the end of the bed. Never did anything else, but you could feel the bed from there.
And does this happen often?
It happened to me a couple times, but it happened to them too.
Right.
Everyone had their chance at that room as they got older.
Yeah. Did you have any sense of who it might be?
No.
Did it scare you, or was it like, eh?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It scared me.
Yeah.
At the time.
Right, sure. Yeah, I mean, like the ghost tour at the Mount, I've been doing it so long and I tell these stories, but every once in a while something will happen and I get like the chills, because it's like this, you get that encounter with something. It really does affect you, even if you think you're used to it. Yeah. Yeah.
What about the energy at Tanglewood? I mean, I love the energy at Tanglewood, but what goes on there?
Tanglewood? Yeah, Tanglewood, I wrote about Tanglewood in the book. I love the stories of Tanglewood. They're very musical, as you might expect, right? And I found the people at Tanglewood to be really welcoming, and they really were happy to share their stories. And apparently, Leonard Bernstein, the famous composer and conductor, he worked there at the end of his life and would see apparently spirits in the Highwood Manor there, and he would talk about it. He would say, "I see them. They're all around." And he would have these experiences. He actually saw the ghost of Serge Kouzovitsky, who was one of the founders of Tanglewood. He reported seeing him walking at the back of the stage while he was conducting. He could see him go by, and he and Andre Previn apparently would do these kind of musical seances to try to conjure up the spirits. There, they would go up to the top floor of the house and play a certain piece of music, thinking that the music might have been what was drawing the spirits out. So it's a great story, Tanglewood. Yeah, there's a lot of good ones there. Yeah. Yeah.
So I lived in the Mount in 1979.
Did you?
I lived in Stable, and I lived in the apartment up on the second floor.
Were you with Shakespeare and Company?
No, I wasn't. I was actually working for Don Asholter running the stable for Fox Hollow Resort because they
Oh, okay.
Valley.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, so anyway, I went there in the spring, and I was touring, kind of giving myself the self-guide of the property, and I ran into the caretakers who had stayed there for the winter.
Yeah.
They were ghostly white. They couldn't wait to get out of there. They're like, whatever you do, don't go in there.
In the stable.
They're coming back.
Yeah.
They had
Yeah.
the worst winter with just horrible hauntings.
Yeah. And they were in the stable,
I was in the
or
stable.
they were in the house. They were everywhere.
I didn't experience anything in the stable.
Yeah.
But they were in the house.
Oh, yeah.
They freaked out. They
Yeah.
were going back.
Thank you for sharing that. I'm always amazed. I've been doing these tours at the Mount for so long, and I hear new stories about it all the time, like just now, like things I never knew.
Yeah, they said it was evil.
Yeah. Well, I have to say, for me, it's I think things may have calmed down because it doesn't feel like evil anymore. It just feels like you can feel it for sure. But I understand in the old days, I think there was a more intense energy there. Yeah.
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 Yeah, that was 1979.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. Well, we're getting close to the end, and just wanted to let you know about a couple things I have going on in October. I'm doing ghost tours at Ventford Hall and the Mount and the Church on the Hill Cemetery, all in Lenox. So please come on out. Actually, the Mount tours, I believe they're all sold out at this point, although we are doing online tours that you can do. So if you go to the Mount's website, there's information about how to do that. Ventford Hall, there's still availability in October. There's several dates. And the Church on the Hill, there's 3 dates in October, and that's all, they're open. They're just come just come on the day. You don't have to make a reservation. I'm also doing an online reading every Tuesday night throughout the month of October over Zoom. And there's information on how to register for that on my website. So I have a card up here if you'd like to take it. It has information if you'd like to, just take that home with you about the things I'm doing. I also have the book, of course, and my wife, who's back there, is an artist, and she has some Halloween-themed art up here at the table too. If you'd like to come and take a look, we'll turn the light on. I think we need to. Yeah, a question or?
No, I just have a short story. So I belong to a medieval reenactment group, and at Bedford Hall, we used to do a medieval fair. And during the course of the fair, people thought that they saw somebody in the upper window of Bedford Hall.
Yeah.
And no one was allowed up there at the time.
Any idea who that would have been?
Excuse me?
Any idea who that might have been?
I have not a clue.
Yeah.
People were saying, "Oh, there's somebody up there."
Yeah.
Who's that up there?
Yeah.
There was nobody.
That's cool. No, I love Ventford. I've been really enjoying getting to know it because it's new to me as a place to talk about the ghosts. So I want to share just one more story before we have to end. And this one is about Pittsfield. How many of us here are from Pittsfield? I know a few of us, right? All right, awesome. And I am going to need more light here. So this is about the phantom train of Pittsfield. Did anyone hear about that before? The ghost train of Pittsfield. All right, well, here it is, a short story. I'm going to use this. There is something ghost-like about trains. They come to us from beyond. They pass us by and disappear again into the unknown. That eerie, distant whistle, that ominous oncoming light, and the sudden dark and silence that follow their passing. All of it seems otherworldly when seen from a certain point of view. Maybe this air of mystery explains why there have been so many stories about ghost trains over the years. The Berkshires has its own, the Phantom Train of Pittsfield. The year was 1958, and the place was the Bridge Lunch Diner, which was formerly located at the intersection of North and Eagle Streets, in the tiny 18-seater, which was perched on the railway bridge at present-day Sotiel Park. Wow. Okay. Owner John Quirk and several lunchtime customers were startled by the sudden appearance of an old-fashioned steam train barreling east toward Boston down the seldom-used track. Witnesses reported seeing a baggage car, 5 or 6 coaches, and a coal car so clearly that they could see the glowing embers. When reports of the incident started streaming in, railway officials insisted that no such train had run on the line that day. In fact, they said no steam engine had run through that region in years. Nevertheless, 1 month later, witnesses again reported seeing a steam engine speed by the diner beneath the Bridge Street overpass. And again, train officials dismissed the reports. But the story began to spread. Many said it was the ghost of a passenger train that collided with another in 1865, killing 11. Others connected it to an 1893 incident in which a train bound for Boston was crushed by a collapsing bridge near Chester, resulting in the death of 14 people. Wherever it may have come from, the spectral steam train did not reappear that year, and indeed, there have been no credible reports of sightings since 1958. But the story of the phantom train still echoes like a distant whistle through the Berkshire Hills. Thank you. Thanks. Thank you so much. Thank you. And thank you so much for joining me tonight. And just I want to say, I encourage you to get out there and explore some of these locations. I mean, one of the biggest joys of working on this book was the fact that, thank you, was the fact that that I could go to these places and just feel them and just be there. So I encourage you to go and with your senses open and your imagination engaged, and see if you can feel that special presence that these places have that has inspired so many stories. And if you should experience something there, I encourage you to tell stories of your own. These are our stories, the stories of our lives, the stories that only we can tell. And if we don't tell them, who will? Lore is a living thing. And if we don't continue to remember the old stories and tell new ones of our own, it becomes lost. And so do we. And so do the ghosts. And Edith Wharton wrote, "The ghost should never be allowed to forget that his only chance of survival is in the tales of those who have encountered him." Thank you, everybody, and happy Halloween. Yeah. Thank you. Thanks. Thanks.